Clearview Chronicles, Assimi Goïta, the soldier who took control of Mali. The story of modern Mali cannot be told without one name dominating the conversation: Assimi Goïta. To supporters, he is a patriot who stood against corruption, foreign influence, and a collapsing security system. To critics, he is a military ruler who transformed a democratic crisis into long-term authoritarian control. But regardless of where people stand politically, one thing is undeniable. In less than 6 years, Assimi Goïta went from a relatively unknown military officer to one of the most powerful leaders in Africa. And his rise happened in the middle of war, political collapse, and a growing geopolitical battle over the future of the Sahel. Chapter 1: The Making of a Soldier. Born in 1983 in Bamako, Assimi Goïta grew up in a country already struggling with instability. Mali had long been considered one of West Africa's more stable democracies after the fall of dictatorship in the early 1990s. But beneath the surface, corruption, poverty, ethnic tensions, and weak state control continued to grow. Meanwhile, northern Mali remained volatile, a vast desert region where separatist rebellions and armed groups repeatedly challenged government authority. Goïta entered the Malian armed forces and steadily built a reputation inside elite military circles. He eventually became associated with Mali's special forces and anti-terror operations, gaining battlefield experience during years of escalating conflict against jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. By the late 2010s, Mali was under immense pressure. Terrorist attacks were spreading, villages were collapsing, public trust in the government was evaporating, and many soldiers believed the political leadership in Bamako had failed the country. Chapter 2: The Fall of President Keïta. In 2020, public anger exploded. Mass protests erupted against President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, often known as IBK. Citizens accused his government of corruption, election irregularities, and failing to stop the country's spiraling violence. The military was also frustrated. Many soldiers felt abandoned on the battlefield, while political elites in Bamako remained disconnected from the crisis. Then came August 18, 2020. Soldiers mutinied at a military base near Bamako. Within hours, armed troops detained senior government officials. President Keïta was arrested, and by the end of the day, Mali's government had fallen. At the center of the coup stood Assimi Goïta. The little-known colonel suddenly became the face of a military takeover that shocked the world. Chapter 3: The People's Colonel. Unlike many coup leaders in African history, Goïta initially gained substantial public support. Thousands of Malians celebrated in the streets after the collapse of Keïta's government. Many saw the military intervention not as an attack on democracy, but as a rescue mission for a country they believed was already collapsing. Goïta positioned himself carefully. He promised reform. He promised national sovereignty. And most importantly, he promised security. The new military leadership created the National Committee for the Salvation of the People, presenting itself as a temporary stabilizing force rather than a permanent dictatorship. International organizations, however, were alarmed. ECOWAS condemned the coup and demanded a rapid return to civilian rule. Western governments warned of sanctions and diplomatic isolation. But inside Mali, many citizens remained supportive of the military leadership. Why? Because years of democratic governance had failed to stop the violence devastating the country. Chapter 4: The Second Coup. Then came the twist that changed everything. In 2021, Mali's transitional civilian government attempted a cabinet reshuffle that reduced the influence of military leaders. Goïta responded immediately. In May 2021, he launched a second coup. The interim president and prime minister were detained. Goïta accused civilian leaders of sabotaging the transition process. Days later, he officially declared himself interim president. The message was unmistakable. The military was no longer operating behind the scenes. It was now fully in control. Chapter 5: Breaking with France. For years, France had maintained a major military presence in Mali through anti-terror operations aimed at jihadist groups across the Sahel. But many Malians increasingly viewed the French presence with suspicion and resentment. Despite years of intervention, insecurity continued spreading. Goita capitalized on that frustration. Under his leadership, Mali dramatically shifted away from France and Western military partnerships. French troops eventually withdrew. Relations with Western governments deteriorated rapidly. And then came a geopolitical earthquake. Russia entered the picture. Chapter 6. The Russian Connection. As ties with the West collapsed, Mali strengthened security relations with Russia. Russian military advisors, equipment, and Wagner-linked personnel began appearing across the country. The controversial Wagner Group became deeply involved in Mali's counterinsurgency operations. Supporters of the partnership argued that Russia treated Mali as a sovereign ally rather than a former colony. Critics accused the government of replacing one foreign dependency with another. Human rights organizations also raised concerns over alleged abuses during joint military operations involving Malian and Russian-linked forces. But politically, the alliance strengthened Goita's image as a leader resisting Western pressure. Across parts of Africa, he became symbolic of a broader anti-Western shift emerging in the Sahel. Chapter 7. The AES Alliance. By 2023 and 2024, military governments had also taken power in neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger. The three nations eventually formed the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES. It was more than a political partnership. It was a declaration, a statement that the Sahel's new military-led governments intended to chart an independent path outside traditional Western influence. The AES alliance promoted joint military operations, regional self-defense, economic cooperation, resistance to external pressure. For supporters, it represented African sovereignty. For critics, it represented growing militarization and democratic backsliding. Either way, Assimi Goïta emerged as one of the alliance's central figures. Chapter 8. Power without elections. Originally, Mali's military leadership promised a temporary transition, but timelines repeatedly shifted. Elections were delayed. International pressure increased. Yet Goïta's control only became stronger. In 2025, a new political arrangement granted him a 5-year mandate, allowing him to potentially remain in power until 2030 without immediate national elections. For supporters, stability came first. For opponents, democracy was disappearing. The distinction between interim leader and permanent ruler had effectively vanished. Chapter 9. The Security Test. Despite military consolidation, Mali's security crisis remains severe. Extremist groups continue operating across large parts of the country. Northern regions remain unstable. Separatist factions still challenge state authority, and deadly attacks continue targeting military forces. In April 2026, coordinated attacks near Tinzawatan reportedly killed Malian soldiers and Russian allies, triggering a major AES military response. Soon after, Goïta appointed himself Minister of Defense, further centralizing power around the presidency. The symbolism was clear. Mali is now governed through a wartime mentality. Chapter 10. Hero or Strongman. Today, Assimi Goïta represents one of Africa's most controversial political transformations. To supporters, he restored national pride. He rejected foreign domination. He stood up to France and the West. He prioritized security and sovereignty. To critics, he weakened democracy, expanded military rule, suppressed political transition, and concentrated power around himself. But perhaps the most important reality is this: Goïta's rise did not happen in isolation. He emerged from decades of instability, failed governance, foreign intervention, and growing public frustration. His presidency reflects something much larger happening across the Sahel, a generation of military-led governments redefining power in Africa. Clearview Chronicles Outro. The rise of Assimi Goïta is not just the story of one man. It is the story of a region at war with insecurity, foreign influence, and its own political identity. And as Mali moves deeper into military rule while strengthening alliances with Russia and neighboring juntas, the world is left asking one critical question: is Assimi Goïta saving Mali, or transforming it into something entirely different?